Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
I had just finished folding a load of laundry and was halfway through a lukewarm cup of coffee when I heard the gravel crunch under the tires in my driveway, a sound that, for the past 2 days, had triggered nothing but rage bubbling just beneath the surface of my composure. I looked out the front window, already knowing exactly who it was. Derek, my brother, or as I'd been calling him in my head since Saturday morning, the entitled jackass who thought borrowing my car without permission was no big deal. There he was, stepping out of my Honda Civic like he owned the thing, acting like nothing had happened, like we weren't smack in the middle of another one of his Derek moments. You know, the kind where he screws up, shrugs, flashes that smug half-smile, and expects the world to keep spinning like nothing ever happened. The kind that usually left someone else cleaning up the mess. And this time, that someone was me. He didn't knock, didn't text, didn't even call in advance. Just strolled in through the front door like it was still 1999 and we were kids in our parents' house. He tossed my keys on the counter and said, "Hey, thanks for the ride, Em," like he'd borrowed a lawn chair, not a whole damn vehicle. I stared at the keys for a beat longer than I should have, forcing myself to inhale slowly so I wouldn't say something I couldn't take back. But the moment I saw the slip of paper in his other hand, yellow, folded, obviously official, my calm snapped clean in half. "I got a little ticket," he said, with a shrug so casual it made my spine itch. "No big deal, just a fine. $50, maybe 75 tops." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, and in that moment, I swear I could hear the last 10 years of my life whispering warnings in my ear. Every time I'd let something slide, every time I'd chosen silence over conflict, every damn moment I bit my tongue while he ran through life like rules were optional and apologies were for suckers. Then I smiled, not a nice smile, not even a fake polite one. No, this was the kind of smile that says, "I've been waiting for this." "Cool," I said, taking the ticket from his hand as calmly as if he'd just handed me a grocery list. "Then you'll love the court summons I filed under your name." And just like that, the color drained from his face, pale like he'd seen a ghost. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like his brain was trying to catch up with his ego. And I stood there, watching the panic crawl across his expression like a sunrise in reverse. That's when I knew he hadn't changed. Not one damn bit. You're kidding," he stammered, the confidence draining out of him like a tire with a slow leak. "Right?" I didn't answer. I just turned back toward the laundry and started folding again, slow and deliberate, like his meltdown was background noise. That's when it started to sink in. For him, I mean. He finally understood that I wasn't bluffing, or at least he couldn't tell anymore. Now, let's pause for a second because I know what you might be thinking. It's just a fine, right? Why go nuclear? But tell me this, have you ever had someone in your life who treated your boundaries like speed bumps? Who borrowed without asking, lied without shame, and expected forgiveness like it was part of your job description? If someone in your family crossed the line too many times, would you finally snap? Would you let them drown in their mess? Or would you throw them a lifeline? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I'm not sure I made the right call. You see, it wasn't about the fine. Not really. It was about the fact that Derek had walked into my life again like nothing ever stuck to him. Like I was still the responsible older sister who'd bail him out of trouble, patch things up, clean up the mess, and smile while doing it. But I wasn't her anymore. Not after everything, not after what he did back then. The last time I let Derek off the hook, I lost something I'll never get back. It was a long time ago, but I remember it clearly. How he showed up at my door drunk and panicked. How he begged me to cover for him. How I did what I always did and took the fall because it seemed easier than saying no. And it cost me more than he'll ever know. It was the first time my marriage cracked. The first time I felt like I didn't own my own life. And I never told him. Never told anyone, really. But I carried it every day. So this time, when he took my car without asking, when he got caught speeding in a construction zone and told me it was just a fine, I didn't see a traffic ticket. I saw the years he'd stolen from me, the trust he'd burned like gasoline, and I decided it was finally time he felt some of that weight. He started pacing, trying to laugh it off. "You're messing with me. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't take it that far." I shrugged. "Try me." And for once, he didn't have a comeback. He just stared at me, eyes wide, like he was finally seeing someone he didn't recognize. That's when I realized I wasn't just bluffing. I wasn't just playing a game to teach him a lesson. I was ready to let it all burn. But what he didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone yet, was that the court summons was just a start. There were other things he thought were buried, things I'd been digging up in silence, because sometimes the only way to get peace is to drag the truth into the light, no matter who it burns. And this was just the first spark. The thing about Derek, what people never understood, especially those outside the family who only saw the charming smile, the quick wit, the disarming way he could make a room lean in his direction, is that he wasn't born reckless or careless or selfish, at least not in the obvious way. No, Derek's brand of entitlement was nurtured, cultivated, and reinforced over decades, like a family heirloom passed down from one generation to the next, polished by our mother's indulgent excuses and protected by the same tired mantra. He doesn't mean any harm, he's just like that. And maybe when we were kids, that phrase was enough to soften the edges of his misbehavior, to make it tolerable when he snapped the head off my favorite Barbie or lied about the broken vase in the hallway, or blamed me for the dent in Dad's truck, even though he was the one who snuck it out of the garage while our parents were asleep. But what happens when a kid who never faces consequences grows into a man who thinks the rules don't apply to him? I'll tell you what happens. He starts borrowing cars without asking, brushing off fines like they're loose change, and expecting you to laugh along like it's all just part of some brother-sister sitcom. After he left that afternoon, still pale and twitchy, muttering something about calling his lawyer friend, I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the slip of paper he'd left behind. The ticket with my name on it, because of course he didn't mention that he'd told the cop I'd given him permission. It wasn't even the dollar amount that bothered me. I could have paid it and moved on. It was the principle, the absolute gall of him to drag me into his mess, then act like I was the unreasonable one for being upset. I sat there for a long time, thinking about how we got here, how many times I'd let things go, how many times I'd been told to let things go for the sake of peace, for the sake of family. It's funny how memory works, how one moment in the present can trigger a flood from the past, like your mind's been waiting for a reason to unlock the vault. That day at the table, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. I was 14, and Derek had just turned 7. Our mom had taken him to the toy store for his birthday, and when they came home, he was holding a brand new remote-controlled car, the kind I'd been begging for months earlier. I remember looking up from my math homework, heart sinking, and asking her, quietly because I already knew the answer, if he'd picked it out himself. She smiled like I'd just said the most ridiculous thing in the world and replied, "Well, sweetie, he's a boy. He needs boy toys. You'll get something nice for your birthday, too." And that was the beginning, or maybe just the moment I realized it had already begun. That subtle hierarchy where his wants were urgent, important, deserving, and mine were optional. That pattern never changed, not even as we grew up. Derek crashed Mom's car at 17. I was the one grounded for letting him take it. He failed out of community college. I was the one asked to help him register again the following semester. He forgot Mom's birthday dinner twice. I was the one who got guilt-tripped into buying a card and saying it was from both of us. And every time I complained, every time I hinted that maybe, just maybe, he should be responsible for his own actions, I was met with the same condescending tilt of the head, the same deflection. "You're always so serious, Emma. Can't you just lighten up?" But I didn't want to lighten up. I wanted to be heard. I wanted to stop carrying the burden of his chaos. And more than anything, I wanted someone, anyone, to say, "You're right. He was wrong, and you don't have to forgive him just because he's your brother." Later that evening, as I sat in my bedroom with the ticket still lying on the nightstand like an accusation, my phone buzzed. It was Mom, of course, because Derek never fights his own battles when he can outsource them to someone who still sees him as her golden boy. Her voice was tight, clipped with that practiced edge she used whenever she felt personally inconvenienced by other people's emotions. "Emma," she began, not even bothering with pleasantries, "I heard what happened. Derek's very upset. He says you threatened legal action over a simple misunderstanding." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that surprised even me. "A misunderstanding? He stole my car, Mom." She sighed, and I could picture her rubbing her forehead, the same way she used to whenever I tried to explain why I was crying after another one of Derek's tantrums. "Emma, don't be dramatic. You two have always bickered, but dragging things into court? That's extreme." For a moment, I almost slipped into the old rhythm, apologizing, softening, backpedaling, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the years of resentment finally hardening into resolve. Maybe it was the realization that every time I'd let it go in the past, I'd carved away another piece of my own dignity. I said calmly, "He forged my permission. That's not bickering. That's illegal." There was silence on the line. And then, in a voice filled with cold, maternal disappointment, she said, "You're being cruel. He's your brother." I didn't respond. I just ended the call and stared at the ceiling for what felt like an hour, realizing that even now, even with all the facts, even with all the evidence that Derek had crossed a line, I was still the villain for not forgiving him fast enough, still the bad guy for asking for accountability. And just when I thought the day couldn't twist any deeper, my phone buzzed again, this time with a number I hadn't seen in months. Lisa, Derek's ex, the one he never talked about, the one who'd vanished from our family orbit so quickly, it was like she'd been scrubbed from memory. I answered, my voice wary. "Lisa?" There was a pause. Then she said softly, "There's something you should know about Derek, about what happened." I didn't know who else to tell. And just like that, everything shifted again. Because what I thought was just another reckless screw-up from my brother was apparently only the surface. There were deeper things at play, secrets I hadn't even imagined. And suddenly, I realized I hadn't filed that summons just for a traffic ticket. I'd opened a door I couldn't close. When Lisa's voice crackled through the line that evening, there was something fragile and raw about it, like she was holding back the full weight of something she'd been carrying for far too long. And for a brief moment, I almost felt guilty for answering at all, as if I were trespassing into a confession that wasn't meant for me. But then she said my name, not in the perfunctory way people do, but like it meant something. And in that second, I knew this wasn't a courtesy call, or some nostalgic trip down memory lane from someone who used to be part of the family. No, this was the beginning of something I hadn't prepared for, something that would rip the scab off a wound I'd convinced myself had healed a long time ago. She hesitated at first, dancing around pleasantries with the awkwardness of someone who didn't quite know how to approach a person they hadn't spoken to in over 3 years. And for a while, we talked about nothing at all. The weather, work, how she'd moved to another state. But then her voice dropped an octave, low and serious, and she said, "Emma, there's something I've kept to myself. But after what I heard from Derek, what he said about you in that whole car situation, I couldn't keep it in anymore, not in good conscience." And just like that, the air between us thickened, heavy with expectation, as if the truth was already sitting in the room with me, waiting to be acknowledged. She told me that back when she and Derek were still together, back when he was bouncing between jobs, playing the victim every time someone asked him to act like an adult, when he was couch surfing at my place after yet another failed lease, he did something I never suspected, something that, in hindsight, explained a lot of things I had buried under my need to believe that family meant loyalty and not just blood. According to Lisa, Derek had been in a tight spot financially, owing a few thousand in credit card debt he'd racked up buying tech gear and gaming setups he couldn't afford. And instead of doing the hard thing, getting a second job, selling what he didn't need, or just admitting he was drowning, he told Lisa that he had a plan, a shortcut, something easy. He told her he'd apply for a job at the real estate firm where I'd been working at the time, a small but respected company where I'd spent 6 years building a name, a place where I finally felt like I belonged, where I wasn't Derek's sister, but Emma Morgan, the capable, organized woman with a reliable instinct for contracts and a reputation for doing things by the book. Derek, of course, didn't make it through the front door. They never even interviewed him. He didn't fill out an application. What he did instead, Lisa said, was borrow one of my work emails from an old shared document he wasn't supposed to have access to, probably from that time I let him stay with me and he'd used my laptop when his broke. Then he forged a series of communications to make it look like I had vouched for him, personal references, insider recommendations, even direct approval from my boss that he'd faked by copying formatting and header styles from emails he'd seen me send. Lisa only found out about it later, when Derek bragged about how he'd gotten past the firewall and manipulated the hiring manager into giving him a short contract gig for tech assistance, just long enough to skim a few $100s worth of office electronics, claim they were lost during shipping, and disappear before anyone got wise. But someone did get wise. And because all the trails led back to the employee whose name and internal credentials had been used, mine, I was the one who ended up in the line of fire. My reputation took a hit. Quietly but significantly. Suddenly, I wasn't being invited to client meetings anymore. I got passed over for a promotion I was a shoo-in for. And then, one day, I was told that the company was going in a different direction, and my services were no longer needed. At the time, I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe an internal shakeup. Maybe I'd been too aggressive on a couple of deals. I never imagined it had anything to do with Derek. Why would I? He told me he'd been temping at a logistics warehouse across town. He said he was working late shifts, hustling, trying to get his life together. And I believed him. Because I always did. Lisa told me she left him not long after that. Not because of that incident alone, but because she started seeing a pattern of manipulation, of casual dishonesty, of using people who loved him as leverage to get what he wanted without ever offering anything in return. She said she didn't have proof back then, not the kind that would stand up in court, but she kept records, screenshots, logs, even a few emails he forwarded to her, thinking she'd be impressed. I thought he was just cocky, she said. But then I realized he was dangerous in a way that doesn't leave bruises, just ruins. I didn't cry when she told me. I didn't yell. I didn't even shake. What I felt more than anything was clarity, a cold, sharp sort of clarity that cut through every excuse I'd ever made for him, every time I'd told myself he meant well, every moment I'd swallowed my own instincts in favor of keeping the peace. Because this wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just Derek being Derek. This was betrayal, calculated, personal, and devastating. I thanked Lisa for her honesty, told her I'd handle it, and ended the call. Then I sat in the dark with my hands folded in my lap, staring at nothing, letting the silence close in around me. And in that silence, I made a decision, not out of spite or anger or even revenge, but out of a deep, unwavering need to reclaim something he'd stolen from me without ever realizing it. My sense of control. I wasn't going to scream or call him names or demand an apology he'd never mean. I was going to hit him where it hurt, in the place he thought no one could reach. I would be calm, precise, patient. I would collect every lie, every manipulation, every stolen piece of my life, and I would build a case, not just legally, but morally. I would make him answer, not to me, but to the truth. Because when someone breaks you slowly, over years, with charm and half-truths and convenient forgetfulness, the most powerful thing you can do isn't scream. It's to make them watch you stand up, stronger than before, and walk away without looking back. And I wasn't just walking away anymore. I was marching toward something, toward justice, toward resolution, toward the end of his excuses. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't settle into your bones the way physical fatigue does, but rather coils itself like smoke around your thoughts, clouding your judgment and warping your sense of balance. And that's the state I found myself in during the week that followed Lisa's phone call. A strange, simmering haze of betrayal, clarity, and something deeper. Something that had more weight than anger, but less fire than rage. Something like resolve hardened into steel, the kind you don't sharpen overnight, but over a lifetime of being told to stay quiet, to be understanding, to be the better person because someone else refuses to grow up. I didn't tell Derek what I knew, not yet, and not because I was unsure of what to do or torn between love and accountability, but because I wanted him to sit in his discomfort a little longer, to marinate in that uncertainty and fear he so rarely had to face, to feel what it's like when someone who has always cleaned up your mess finally walks away with the mop, still leaning in the corner, untouched. I wanted him to realize that the people who care the most can also be the ones who, when pushed far enough, stop caring altogether, and that it's not an explosion that ends things, but the cold, deliberate quiet afterwards. I began by pulling together everything I had: old emails, fragments of conversations, notes from Lisa, and the names of former coworkers who might remember odd discrepancies from those final months at the firm. And even though I wasn't a lawyer, and certainly not someone who had ever imagined herself sitting at a dining table surrounded by folders like a third-rate detective in a late-night drama, I understood enough to know that, if it came to it, I could force his hand in ways he wouldn't see coming. And yet, there was still a part of me that wondered if I'd go through with it, if I'd really press charges, expose him, drag the whole family into the kind of spectacle that never quite leaves you. And for a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered all the small ways I'd been dismissed, forgotten, used, and that pity evaporated like dew on hot pavement. It was during one of those evenings, papers spread out in front of me, soft music playing in the background as a weak attempt to keep my nerves from curling in on themselves, that I got another unexpected call. This time from Mark, my ex-husband, who I hadn't heard from in months and hadn't seen in over a year, not since the divorce papers were signed with more exhaustion than animosity. Both of us too drained by years of quiet disappointment to bother with dramatic exits. His voice, as always, was steady and measured, a man who never said more than necessary. But there was a warmth in it too, one that surprised me. I heard about the car thing, he said, after the obligatory greetings, and I could tell immediately from his tone that someone in the family had reached out, probably my mother, hoping that Mark, the ever-pragmatic mediator, could knock some sense into me. "And your mom's worried," he added, a half-laugh in his voice that didn't quite land. "I'm not," I replied, and then, without quite knowing why, I told him everything about the ticket, the forged permissions, Lisa's confession, the job I lost, the betrayal that had never been named until now, and to his credit, he didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice, just listened with the kind of silence that feels like a balm. And when I finally stopped to breathe, he simply said, "I believe you, and you're not crazy." Those words hit harder than I expected, not because I doubted my own sanity, but because it had been so long since someone just accepted my truth without asking for proof, without trying to talk me down or smooth over the rough edges for the sake of family harmony. In that moment, Mark wasn't my ex or my past. He was the only person, aside from Lisa, who saw the whole picture and didn't flinch. With renewed confidence, I moved into phase 2, not a formal charge, not yet, but something smaller, more personal, more strategic. I called in a few favors of my own. A friend of mine, Jen, worked in city records and helped me confirm that the ticket Derek got was issued under my license plate, but listed a driver description that didn't match mine. A small but important discrepancy that, if I wanted to fight it, could tip the balance in my favor. I also reached out to a former colleague who'd been at the real estate firm when I was dismissed and who vaguely remembered the weird situation with the office inventory and the internal rumors that something fishy had gone down. I wasn't building a legal case so much as I was building momentum, pressure, a slow tightening of the walls around Derek until he could feel them closing in. Then, like clockwork, the family started circling back. My cousin sent a vague message about letting things go. An aunt left a voicemail reminding me that family is forever. And of course, my mother called again, her voice laced with the same weary disappointment as before. "Emma," she said, "you've made your point. You scared him. Isn't that enough?" But it wasn't about scaring him. It never really was. It was about forcing him to look in a mirror he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. And just when I thought things might settle, that maybe Derek would just fade away for a while and lick his wounds in silence, he showed up, uninvited, of course, on my porch one night, half drunk, with that same sloppy confidence he always used when he thought charm could undo damage. His eyes were glassy, his breath sour with liquor, and his voice, oh God, his voice, tried so hard to sound casual, like he could just talk his way out of this the same way he'd talked his way out of everything else. "I know you're mad," he began, leaning against the railing like we were catching up over beers. "But come on, Em, you don't have to burn the whole damn house down." I didn't respond right away. I let him talk. Let him ramble about how things got blown out of proportion, how Lisa never liked him anyway, how I was stronger than this petty revenge stuff. And for a brief second, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who got away with lying because he cried harder than I did, the one who knew that all he had to do was wait until I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I didn't want to fight anymore. But I was done being the one who caved. When he finally ran out of words, I stepped forward, close enough that he couldn't pretend we were just bantering siblings anymore, and I said, "You didn't just take my car. You stole my time, my name, my job, my peace, and I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this because I want you to feel what it's like when the world stops cleaning up after you." And with that, I closed the door in his face. And behind that door, I didn't feel triumphant or vengeful. I felt free. But freedom, I was learning, wasn't the end of the story. It was just another beginning. Because if you spend your life cleaning up someone else's messes, the first day you stop feels like peace. The second day, it feels like war. The morning after Derek showed up on my porch reeking of whiskey and desperation, I stood in the kitchen watching the sun inch across the countertops like it was trying to warm a house that had long since stopped feeling like a home. And as I wrapped my hands around the chipped mug that had survived 3 moves, 1 divorce, and 1,000 mornings much quieter than this one, I found myself thinking not about Derek, not about my mother's inevitable voicemail filled with guilt and thinly veiled threats of family shame, and not even about the court summons I had waved in his face, but instead about the sheer absurdity of how far one seemingly small act, a borrowed car, a stupid ticket, a throwaway lie, could ripple into something so massive, so disruptive, so unavoidably necessary. The truth is, I didn't plan to dismantle my brother's illusion of invincibility with that much precision. It started as a flicker, a spark of indignation that grew each time someone told me to be quiet, to let it go, to remember that he's family. And it wasn't until Lisa's trembling voice cracked open the vault I'd spent a decade trying to forget that I understood this wasn't just about him, and it wasn't just about me either. It was about a life lived under the weight of other people's messes, a life too often shaped by decisions I never got to make, because I was always too busy reacting, protecting, cleaning up what someone else ruined, and then walked away from like it didn't matter. So when I say I didn't do it for revenge, I mean it in the most honest, naked way possible, because revenge implies that I still cared what he felt, that I needed him to hurt the way I did, but the truth is, I was long past that point. I didn't want his apology. I didn't need his understanding. I wanted him to face consequences, not to satisfy my pain, but to finally relieve me of the burden of carrying his. And when you spend most of your life being told that your strength is your ability to endure, the first time you choose to stop enduring feels almost like betrayal, until you realize it's the only real act of self-love you've ever committed. After that night, I made my final move. I sent the entire folder, every screenshot, every false email, every piece of testimony Lisa had given me, straight to a lawyer I trusted, one who owed me a favor from a referral I'd made years ago and who, after reading everything, simply replied, "This is enough. He's in deep, Emma. You could bury him if you wanted to." And as I stared at those words on the screen, a strange calm settled over me, not the vengeful satisfaction I might have expected, but something softer, something that felt like closure stretching out its limbs for the first time in years. And yet, even then, I didn't file the lawsuit, not because I couldn't, and not because I'd changed my mind, but because I understood something deeper than anger. That power isn't always about what you do. It's about what you can do and choose not to. And in that choice lies a clarity that can't be faked or shaken or stolen. So I picked up the phone, called the lawyer, and said, "Hold everything. I'm not doing this for a court date. I'm doing this so he knows I could." That afternoon, I drove to the post office with a plain envelope addressed to Derek. Inside was a copy of the full report, redacted where necessary, annotated with Lisa's notes, and marked with a single post-it that read, in my handwriting, "Next time you open your mouth, remember I can open this." I didn't include threats. I didn't beg. I didn't ask for anything. I just wanted him to see, in black and white, what it felt like to lose control of a narrative he'd always written with impunity. I never heard from him directly after that, which didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how quickly the family pulled back, like a tide finally retreating after years of relentless push. My mother stopped calling, at least for a while, and when she did reach out again, her tone was gentler, more tentative, as if she sensed something had shifted and didn't know how to speak to this newer, firmer version of me. My cousin sent awkward holiday texts, but didn't mention Derek. And as for Mark, he sent me a message that simply said, "Proud of you." That was enough. The final step in all of it, oddly, was not legal or dramatic, not even symbolic in a poetic way. It was practical. I traded in my car, the same car Derek had borrowed without asking, the same car I'd driven to work at the real estate firm, to the grocery store, to pick him up from bars, to help him move couches he never paid for. I walked into the dealership, signed the papers, and drove away in something new. Not flashy, not loud, just mine, clean. As I drove down the highway that day with the windows down and the wind tugging at my hair, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel heroic. I felt tired but free. And in that freedom, I started to hear my own voice again, the one that had been drowned out for years by other people's opinions and expectations and needs. And that voice wasn't shouting. It was steady, certain, whole. I didn't do it to teach him a lesson. I didn't do it to be right. I did it because I needed to remember what it feels like to choose myself, to say no more, and to mean it without apology. And maybe he'll learn something from it. Maybe he won't. But that's not my story anymore. Mine ended the moment I realized that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like a door clicking shut. Sometimes it sounds like silence.